Top Right Mike, hope you're all doing well. Today I'm excited to bring you a map preview for the new Lord of the Rings mod, Middle-earth Total War Remastered. I did a flyover in the previous video, but today we're going to be taking a much more detailed look at aspects such as starting territories for each faction, custom settlement models, and wonders. Let's start with some high level stuff. There is 150 regions and 11 factions. I appreciate the number of regions is quite high proportionally to the number of factions. With 150 regions, you probably want about 15 to 16 factions to fill out the map properly. So having only 11 means they need to be given quite big starting territories to compensate. However, going forward, I do plan on adding new factions, which will not only increase faction variety, but more importantly, allow me to reduce the starting size of the factions, which just plays into that core Total War concept of starting small and growing into an empire. Just bear in mind, the original mod was one of the first Lord of the Rings mods ever created for a Total War game. I think it actually was the first. So this is essentially a first stab at what the Lord of the Rings factions could look like. Certain factions do represent different groups of people, and they aren't as split out or developed as they would be in later mods like DAC or Lord of the Rings Total War Remastered. So that's the campaign map at a high level. Let's jump down to the starting positions. So first we have Gondor in white with their 13 provinces, spanning all the way from Ithilien in the east to the Anfalas in the west, and of course incorporating Dol Amroth. Bordering Gondor is Mordor in black, and they also hold Dol Guldur in the south of Mirkwood. To the south of Mordor we have Harad in red, in the desert wastes. They also hold Umbar. As we head east, we will run into the lands of Khand, and there are some Khandish units in this mod, so if you manage to make it all the way to this part of the map, you will be greeted by some Variag units. Heading north is the land of the Easterlings in golden brown. They also occupy some land in Rovanium. And even further north is the Lonely Mountain. So in this mod, Erebor incorporates the city-state of Dale, as well as the Iron Hills. So this faction represents men and dwarves, but I would consider it to be the primary dwarven faction for the mod. Along the mountain ridge is Gundabad, who are basically the goblin faction for this mod, although they do have orcs and uruks in their ranks. They don't hold that many regions to start with, but it is quite a large area, which spans all the way from Moria through Goblin Town and up to Mount Gundabad. Along the banks of the Anduin we have the Beornings. The Beornings were one of only two factions which weren't intended to be playable in the original mod, but I have made them playable in the remaster. They just have quite a small roster, but I'm hoping to add to that as the mod develops. Moving further down, we've got the familiar colours of Rohan, the chief city of Edoras here, as well as Helm's Deep, and Dunharrow in the mountains. Across from Rohan is Isengard and the Tower of Orthanc. And in this mod, Isengard does include Dunland, but the recruitment is quite separate, so in later versions I would like to split out Dunland, which should be fairly straightforward to do, I think. That leaves just two factions then, which is Eriador and the Elves. Eriador was the second faction, which wasn't intended to be playable in the base mod, but they are playable in the remaster. I would consider them to be a bit of a mop-up faction. They don't really represent any single group of people, they just represent all the peoples that reside in this area. So within their ranks they have the Dwarves of Ered Luin, the Northern Dunedain, the Hobbits of the Shire, and lastly some human or men units. Going forward, I would like to split out this faction into its different areas. In the limited testing I've done, Eriador seems to basically steamroll this entire half of the map, so I think separating them out is probably necessary from a gameplay standpoint as well. Last but not least then, we have the Elves, which are represented by this dark blue colour. In this mod, the Elves are portrayed as one faction, which includes the Western Territories, the Realm of Lothlorien, Northern Mirkwood, and lastly Rivendell. Different mods do it in different ways. There is another quite popular Lord of the Rings mod for Rune Total War called 4th Age Total War, which also shows the Elves as one faction. 3rd Age Total War I think had two factions for the Elves, being the Sylvan Elves in the east and the High Elves or equivalent in the west, and then later mods like Dark and Lord of the Rings Total War Remastered have split the Elves into their three different realms, which is something I would like to do in this mod, mainly because it just means they would all have quite small starting territories, which I think is preferable from a gameplay standpoint. And the recruitment is already quite separate. You can get different units from each of the separate Elven realms, so it feels like it would be quite easy to do. Okay, so that is all the starting positions. Next I'm going to move on to the custom settlement models. In this section I'm going to run through the custom settlement models, which I'm sure you will have spotted on the starting territory run through. But in my opinion, the two standout models are Barad-dûr, with its imposing presence, towering over Mount Doom, and Dol Guldur in the south of Mirkwood. To me, they both look like chess pieces on the board. Going back to Gondor, we have Minas Tirith, which hopefully everyone will recognise, and opposite Minas Tirith is Minas Morgul. North of Minas Morgul is Durthang, which has a sort of evil castle vibe to it, and not far from there is the Black Gate, entrance to Mordor. Heading west then, we run into Rohan's capital, Edoras. Placement is slightly off there, I need to fix that. And of course the Fortress of Rohan, Helm's Deep. It doesn't look exactly like it does in the films, but this mod is primarily designed around the books rather than the films, so I mean it is nice to have a model in there nonetheless. Across from Helm's Deep is Tower of Orthanc, and on the other side of Fangorn is Caras Galador. That's about it for the custom models. Umbar does have one, but it looks quite similar to the other models of this culture, so it's quite difficult to tell it apart. But if you look closely, you can sort of see a boat outside the walls. That's part of the model. Pelargir does have its own unique plan, but in practice it just looks like a large Gondorian city, so it doesn't really look any different from Gondor's other settlements. There's only a few other things I wanted to show. The first is the model for a ruined Númenórean city, which is here. So all Gondor villages have this ruined Númenórean model on the campaign map, and I just thought that was quite a nice touch because a lot of these settlements, particularly in Northern Arnor, would have been former Númenórean holdings. So the fact that there's a sort of Númenórean ruins model is just a neat inclusion. The other thing as well is the caves. So I've implemented this cave model in 7 different settlements across the map. It was in the original mod files, it just wasn't really being used, so I've implemented one here for Thorin's Halls. I've put one in Moria, one at Goblin Town, another at Mount Gundabad, and then the Lonely Mountain, Iron Hills, and this settlement here. The last thing I wanted to run through is there are some custom models for certain cultures. So Gondor uses the Numenorian culture, and this is basically what most of their settlements will look like. The Elves also have some custom models for their culture. So you can see here the Grey Havens, and then some smaller settlements here. And the Elves are the only culture in the mod to have their own port model as well. And yeah, that's about it for the settlement models. So next I'm going to move on to wonders. In terms of wonders then, there are actually 9 models for wonders in the original mod files, but not all of them were being used. And you can see that most prevalently in this part of the map. So this here is supposed to be Weathertop, but in the files this is actually the model for Fornost. And I think what's happened is, in initial versions of the original mod, I think Fornost and Illuminas were intended to be ruins because there are models for both of them. But then in later versions of the mod they must have been updated into full settlements, and now they use the ruined Numenorian city model as opposed to the ruins, which is a change I quite like. I actually, when I was porting them, I did implement those models just to see what they would look like, and I think this model they have now looks better, so I'm just going to keep it as is. But yeah, as before, this is the model for Weathertop. Well, it's the Fornost model, but it's in the place of Weathertop. It does look a bit odd with the texture, but it's just very bright and I need to turn it down. To the east of that, we have the ruins of Ost and Edel. Just here. And then over in the Elven provinces, you'll see the Towers of Elistirium. I need to remove the actual model for the settlement here and just have the settlement as the towers, but that you can still see the actual towers themselves. Over to the east, we've got the Argonath, right here. And we of course have Osgiliath, right here. Then north of Minas Morgul, you'll see Cirith Ungol, just here. Does look a little odd just sitting on the mountains, but something I could look to change going forward. That's about it for the wonders and for this video, in fact. So if you are interested in the mod, please join the Discord and subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's plenty more updates to come. But thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.